If you watched my previous videos or videos in which I talk about the balancing about Enlisted, then you would have realized I have mentioned the word Soviet bias on multiple occasions, and therefore in this video we will be talking about just that. In this video we'll be talking about Soviet bias, what it is, some examples, why is it really problematic for the game, or is it really problematic for the game, and what can we do to fix it. That said, without further ado, this video has been made possible for your friends at Discord, meaning that if you haven't liked, subscribed, or joined the Discord, because this video actually has been suggested by the Discord, then I highly suggest that you do. But that said, let's get started with Soviet bias in Enlisted. So the first thing is, what is Soviet bias? And honestly, I do not really have to explain it, but for those who don't know by now, Soviet bias is basically bias towards the Soviet Union in any way, shape, or form, particularly in the form of weapons and progression, which is going to be really interesting going on towards this video. Enlisted is derived from War Thunder, and yes, there is going to be Soviet bias or Russian bias in this case in War Thunder, so hence there will be Soviet bias, well, some in Enlisted. Some examples are that you guys can arguably say are the PPD-3438, the second starting SMG in Moscow, the T-50, the T-34-76 both in Moscow, and most other Soviet vehicles including the T-34 and other Soviet tanks, which are really going to be problematic. Now the question is Soviet bias detrimental, or is it going to be very important for the balancing of the game? And the answer is yes and no. And this really comes down to where you are in the game. Yes, for the early game, the Soviet Union has bias. Just look at Moscow early game. You have the PPD-3438, and then you look at Stalingrad, in which they have the PPD, and then you turn around and look at the other campaigns, such as Berlin, and then you realize, yes, the Soviets definitely have a tire bias, in which the Soviets are literally gonna be good in everything up to SMGs, the bolt action rifles, to even the tanks, which are really gonna be problematic. And then the answer is no, because as you get on into the late game, the Soviet bias really decreases, especially when the Germans unlock the FG-42, the MKB-42, or other weapons such as the MP-43. And yes, I do mean late game weapons. So to recap, yes, the Soviets are having a lot of bias in the early game, and that is where most people are focusing about, because most people do not mind getting into the late game. And no, the Soviets do not have a bias in the late game, in which they are pretty much even. Not to mention the fact that when you factor in two other things such as skills and levels, then it becomes higher. Skill level really attracts to all. For example, if you are a person that can shoot an enemy really quickly, really fast, like no scoping, then you're going to have a higher skill than most Soviet players. And what I mean by that is that the fact that you are going to have an easier time than if you are a person who just started the game, and I mean literally started the game. And for other issues, the level, or I should say progression level, once again, how high of a level you are in the game, really equals. For example, if you have the FG-42, then you can easily counter the Soviet PPSH-41. On the other hand, if you basically have an MP-40, then you basically have extremely hard time countering the PPSH-41. Not to mention, there are some interesting issues concerning the fact that the Soviets have easier time because they do have the PPD-3438, which acts like a mini PPSH-41, so that is going to be an issue for the Axis team. Another issue that we have to account for is the game really revolves on whoever shoots first essentially almost wins. Because if you have a gun and you literally shoot at the enemy before the enemy can shoot or find you, then you're going to have a better chance of killing the person than if you are in the enemy's sights. So needless to say, yes, skill level is an issue, leveling is an issue, and whoever shoots first is an issue. And that's where things are gonna go a little bit wild, concerning the fact that when you account for even levels, even skill issue, and essentially both have their guns essentially directly pointed at each other, then yes, the Soviets have a little bit of bias, especially in the early game, because the Soviets have better weapons, better tanks, and better stuff. And when I say tanks and vehicles, this can even extend to the late game, in which the Soviet Union has a lot of better tanks and a lot of better vehicles. But that said, if you're equally matched skilled, then it becomes not a really big issue, especially if you move towards the late game. So that's going to be interesting. Now you must be wondering, if there is Soviet bias, especially in the early game, how can we fix this? Well, it really comes down to Enlisted. For one, Enlisted isn't even bothering to fix the early game, which It is understandable because it does take a lot of work, and at this point, asking Enlisted to fix something is essentially asking them to go to the moon, which is not really possible. So in order to recount, I believe that the late game units should be more favored toward the Axis, or at least make them even and not get the Soviets a little bit more hand. To recap, just make the later levels more even, and if really Enlisted really wants to try to balance the entire game, they should start from the beginning, in the sense that yes, start from the beginning and make the guns, weapons, tanks even. So yeah, that's all my consensus for Enlisted. Is Enlisted gonna follow that? Probably not, because Enlisted, like I said, fixing something or removing something from the game literally takes years. If not, it is like going to the moon. But that said, guys, this is all for Soviet bias. To recap, once again, there is Soviet bias, especially in the early game, but as the late game goes on, you're gonna have an easier time. But that said, guys, that's all for today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the Discord. Now, before you leave, I would like to thank you very much for watching this video. I would be honored if you could like and subscribe to the channel. Remember, more videos are coming out, so it is a good idea to click on that notification button. Anyways, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.